attendance and attention. And I thought I have several presentations that I've done, but those are already publicly available. So I thought I'd have this as more of an interactive session, and I'll start with sketching the landscape in terms of what's happening, what isn't happening, because there's a lot of talk about this. In terms of my own background in this, I cut my teeth in tech consulting 20 odd years ago in the 3G space when we started to do interesting things on mobile phones. And since then, I've always been interested in the tech side of consulting, which is my specialism. And about 3 years ago, I jumped on the AI bandwagon along with half the world, it looks like, really just to cut through the hype, because there's a vast amount of hype. There's a lot of people trying to sell us stuff that isn't ready, or perhaps they're just going to make a big pile of cash out of it. And Patrick and I were talking beforehand about the other fads that have come along, and to some extent, consultancy is driven on fads and fashions. That doesn't mean it doesn't work, but sometimes clients require us to put old wine in new bottles, as we might say, in order to keep up with the markets and keep up with the Joneses. And there's a lot of evidence that there's kind of a hype curve where you get people implementing things for very good reasons that actually generate results. And then people or firms, clients that are perhaps unsuitable for that technological solution start implementing it simply because they've seen other people doing it. And that's something that we need to be aware of as consultants, as responsible ethical consultants, with firstly the implementation of this for our clients, if we're doing that, but secondly, implementing it ourselves. Just because something is AI, and I'm sure I don't need to tell you this, just because something is AI doesn't mean it's good, doesn't mean it's useful, doesn't mean it's going to benefit us as a consultancy. And I think there's a lot of private equity firms that could learn from that, because from everything I can see, private equity are piling cash into this space at the moment. So you're getting a lot of automation or software consultancies rebranding themselves as AI, and with very little to back it up. Perhaps they might have one consultant using GPT-4. So that's kind of a caveat for the whole talk. We are in peak hype when it comes to AI. However, things have changed. AI has been around in various forms since the 1950s. However, that's very much been in terms of the theory rather than the practice. Since the 80s, we've had sort of processing power to do some predictive analytics for people. What's really set things alight recently has been generative AI. And that's the rise of large language models and the ability of those models to generate stuff, text, images, video, numbers, PowerPoints, blogs, increasingly. Now, I'm happy to talk about other forms of AI, but I think it's in LLMs where the focus has really been in terms of hype, but also in terms of implementation. I'm writing a book on AI at the moment in professional service firms. In terms of the landscape and generative AI, so when I talk about generative AI, I'm talking about Claude from Anthropic, Gemini from consulting, GPT 3.5 and 4 from OpenAI. But there's also, you may not know this, there's also hundreds of other models, some of which have been specifically designed to be downloadable and could run off your laptop. So if you're worried about security, I'll talk about the tech. I won't go too much into the technical side because I can see people starting to fall asleep when I usually do that in a talk, but I will cover that a little bit because it offers some solutions to the security question and also the speed question, which is something people aren't too aware of. But what's really happened over the last 2 years, especially, is the improvement in speed and performance of LLMs. And there's three reasons for that. One is that the firms themselves are learning about the architecture better, what works and what doesn't.
बाहेरच राहिलं का बघ.
Oh, let me just mute you, Giri.
Got him. Okay, I think Joe has muted himself there, so forgive me, folks.
There we go. I've unmuted myself. So the first reason things are improving fast is because the companies are learning. You know, this is really a grand experiment, and as we've seen, there's been quite a few mistakes in terms of security, in terms of generation of sexist, racist, ageist images, and so the companies themselves are learning. The second reason things are getting faster is that there is a feedback loop happening now. So every time you modify or cut and paste or change something in a text or an image, or you reprompt, it's not just giving you a better output, it's also teaching the machine what works and what doesn't. Use the machine loosely. And the third reason for the change is that all of this learning is happening to the same model. So what used to happen before is that learning for images, learning for text, learning for numbers, learning for videos, etc., 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 all used to happen on very different models. With the large language models, and this we'll talk later about how useful they actually are in practice, this learning is all being fed back into the same models. And that means there's almost an exponential rate of improvement. And any of you that have used DALL-E or Midjourney will visually see that over the last year, we've gone from pretty clumsy audio, video, pictures, whatever, to photorealistic or video realistic situations where, in effect, we can now create short films which look as if they are real. So there's this exponential improvement, and that's really what's happening behind generative AI. So that's in terms of the backgrounds to it. I want to talk a little bit about the models themselves, and I won't get too technical here, but basically you've got these 3 or 4 big, huge monsters of models. And they're called, you know, this is where people are getting excited about generalized artificial intelligence, i.e. things that can do at the moment, there's models that can do some things better than human beings. You know, AI can diagnose cancer from images better than doctors or specialists can. But what they're looking for with general intelligence is an ability to do lots of different things better than human can, to be creative, to calculate, to plan, to store memories, to recall memories, and all the rest of it. That's interesting and amazing. And there's lots of reasons why that isn't the route to general artificial intelligence, i.e. getting a bigger LLM won't lead to an intelligent, omniscient, omnipresent entity. But there's a lot of evidence that shows that smaller models that have been trained on very specific use cases not only outperform the bigger models, but they're also faster. So for those of you that are thinking about, I don't know, building a chatbot or having an internal knowledge management system based around AI, which can reflect on your documents, or you're thinking about building a digital twin of yourself if you've got a lot of content that you've done, rather than using something like ChatGPT-4 or Bard 3, what you might want to do is to look at building your own LLM off some of the smaller language models. So I've got 2 or 3 AI projects at the moment. All of them, after a lot of experimentation, I've actually decided to, in effect, download a smaller model, train it on my own material in addition to what it's been trained on, and it gives much better responses and much faster responses.
So Joe, you're uploading kind of data, obviously, to inform that kind of, I suppose, AI, if you want, which is bespoke to your own cadence, your own voice, your own notes and stuff like that. We're actually, as you mentioned, getting a lot of questions in from people not today, but generally in terms of, I suppose, from a management consultancy point of view, that I suppose leveling of the playing field using AI from a management consultancy point of view, and that maybe strikes to the heart of it, that from a smaller kind of practice that they could actually tabulate or calibrate the AI to the specific kind of area of endeavor that they're operating within, be it whatever, how long is a piece of string, but whatever that endeavor is. So perhaps that's a fertile area, maybe just to configure or explore for a moment.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Let me just.
I see someone's asking which small model did you download?
Yeah, I'm just trying. I was just looking it up because I forget. I've got 3 different models that I'm
Well,
using.
we can put a note in afterwards, Joe, and kind of send
Yeah.
it out. Yeah.
Okay. So, and this is a good lesson for smaller consultancies. I'm a big fan of creating intellectual property as you go along as a small consultancy, or even a larger consultancy, but they tend to be quite on it in terms of that. What we're very bad at doing is capturing our audio. So a lot of us will have meetings internally, perhaps with clients, where we can let them know that they're being recorded and that the call might be used, or with partners. It's very rarely recorded, and very rarely is that recording used. So I'm quite lucky. As a professor, I've written probably 1 million words in terms of about the consulting industry. On top of that, I've probably recorded, I don't know, 24 hours worth of video about the consulting industry. And then on top of that, I've got blogs and all the rest of it. It's relatively easy to get this stuff transcribed using AI, using something like Whisper. And then all of this data can be fed into, in effect, something that I've created, which is my digital twin. So I've got a whole load of clients that I use as a mastermind sort of group of boutique leaders. I don't have time to answer all of their questions. So if they've got fairly straightforward questions about CRM or thought leadership or whatever, they can ask my digital twin. And very often it will give them a better answer than I would give, because it's got perfect memory. So if you asked me about the 10 principles of thought leadership, good thought leadership, I might be able to give you 6 off the top of my head, but the AI can give you 10, and it will give you an answer that's better formatted and better written than I have time to do.
Good use of time for sure. And I suppose to that end, one of the areas that we frequently get asked questions on, funnily, is tenders and the calibration of doing tenders, which are kind of obviously a big piece of work. So it strikes me as being there's an opportunity in that particular area if you learn the cadence of the organization and so on from a tender process point of view.
Yeah, and there's specific software now that obviously you can do this yourself. It depends how much time you have. It depends how technically proficient you are. It depends whether or not you want to hire a team on Upwork to build something for you. Most of the things I'm talking about here aren't particularly expensive. A typical project would be around between 2 and 10,000. But there's off-the-shelf software. So again, I think there's one called OpenGen AI, and yeah, and they've built, in effect, it's a wrapper for GPT-4, but it learns off your internal documents, your style. You feed it with previous proposals and bids that you've written, and then you feed it the request for information or the request for proposal that you've been sent, and it will automatically generate answers. It's actually pretty good. I was quite skeptical. I did a run through with them off a few things and off some of my work, and it worked pretty well. More suited, I guess, for the more standardized public sector procurement process, rather than the ones where you really get your heart in. You can show your own branding and all the rest of it.
Yeah. And I think that's been our experience as well. I suppose the concern that you might have, or people kind of enunciate, is that whole intellectual kind of rights. And I suppose it's that point of maybe just having a siloed AI that you can actually have a ring fence of security around it, so that, the input that you're putting in is your own, isn't going into the broader universe out there. And that's something that frequently we get asked questions on.
Yeah. I mean, there are companies that offer you it's called a RAG process. So in effect, your own documentation is stored away from the LLM itself, and it runs a query on your own documents and a query on the LLM. And in effect, those two are combined. How they're combined depends on the software solution. A much more secure way of doing it is to have your own running on a laptop. I've literally got mine running on a laptop beside me. I think it crashed earlier. So you do have some issues, but in effect, that laptop's not connected to the internet when I don't want it to be, and it runs by itself, so there's no security risk at all.
That's actually an interesting off-the-shelf solution that sounds quite logical. But it is a concern, I suppose, where people are, particularly on ChatGPT 4, for example, where they're even building their own models within that, which you can do now. You can, and you can say not to share it, but there is a concern that it is going into the collective, for want of a better word.
Yes, yeah. So the GPT models that run off GPT-4 and lower for OpenAI um, are based around a RAG model. So they give you the option, I believe they certainly did when I last looked at it, of not sharing your material, not sharing the queries that are run off it with the big engine. However, and don't get me wrong, the RAG model should protect you against that. If you are very concerned about security, I would still be a bit skeptical, because pretty much everything that the big firms have told us about their LLM model security has been able to be broken until, well, and the latest one I read about was this morning. So if security is of prime importance, if in effect you're dealing with secrets and you want a 0% chance, you're much better downloading this and paying a firm to train it for you.
Yeah, I think it's a factor. I mean, we live in a digital reality now where inevitably cyber is one of the number one, if not certainly the top three issues that all kind of entities face. It's not a question of if, but rather when you're going to get hacked.
Yes.
So at that piecemeal, this is becoming a building block in the management consultancy profession as, I suppose, an aid to automation, as an aid to process. And one of the questions we often get asked, Joe, is, will AI take over the role of management consultants? Now, I will preface it by saying our own view would be that actually it'll probably drive management consultancy to more niche kind of areas in terms of real added value for the specialists and uber niche kind of areas. Because the process point of view, clearly, looking at the march of digitalization and transformation in that area is going down that path, but it's opening up huge opportunities for uber niche areas of
Yep.
specialization. What's your own view on that?
Yeah, so I think you're right. So it's quite interesting. So the book I'm writing is on looking at professional services generally, which kind of includes, everything from, professors to lawyers to accountants to marketing people and all the rest of it, and consultants. Now, the analysis I've done on the data I've got so far shows that consultancy is behind the rest of the firms. And that's for a very good reason when you think about it. So the subject matter of management consulting is really bloody complicated. So unlike a human body, or the law, organizations are highly diverse, they're highly emergent, they have properties at different levels, they're in very, very different formats all around the world, and what works in one firm might not work in another firm if it's smaller in a different sector in a different country at a different time. You can't say that of human bodies. Generally speaking, if you chop a leg off a human body, the same types of things are going to happen. Roughly speaking, if you give human bodies interventions, roughly the same type of outputs are going to happen. Certainly with the law, you've got a fixed body of knowledge, and it changes very slowly. And when it changes according to very specific mechanisms. That isn't true in consultancies, or sorry, that isn't true in organizations. So my own view is that whilst we are going to see, and this is in the short term, whilst we are seeing significant impacts to the very business model of law, accounting, medicine, academia, it's going to be a bit slower than organizations and management consultancy. And that's not to say that it's not going to have an impact, but that expertise that we have is, I'm not saying it's more difficult, but it's of a different nature to that in accounting, law, medicine, academia. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that what we've seen over the last, and we've talked about this, Patrick, what we've seen over the last 10, 15 years is kind of a pulling apart of low value standardized consultancy that a client could probably do for themselves if they could be bothered, and the high value unknown unknowns or known unknowns, where you're genuinely helping clients with a problem that they've got no idea how to solve and wouldn't know where to start, and perhaps even don't know what the problem is in the first place. And you've got this pulling apart in the consulting industry of the low value stuff getting increasingly commodified and standardized and outsourced, and the high value stuff going up in price. And AI is only going to exacerbate that difference. So I think what we're going to get is increasing codification, commodification, automation of fairly standard stuff, getting market intelligence, writing reports on what benchmarking or whatever, versus the more innovative, creative, higher value, higher trust consulting that we like doing, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing we would say is that there is a rush, kind of a Klondike feel to it at the moment. To your preface, that there's an awful lot of energy being thrown at it. There's a lot of money being thrown at it at the moment, and it's a bit like, I suppose, if you go back to Microsoft in the early days, there was a number of potential Microsofts out there. It just so happened that was the one that mightn't necessarily have been ultimately the best, but that was the one that survived at that particular moment in time. And there is that sense of it. And when I look at it at the moment in terms of AI, there is that sense of a kind of gold rush going on, for want of a better word.
Yes, yeah, it's wild. It's a bit Wild Westy out there, and yeah. So don't get me wrong. We're very early in the journey, and I have no doubt that in 5-10 years' time, we might well be seeing management advice being given by AI, or organizational advice being given AI, that generates roughly the same level of success as experienced consultants. However, there's always going to be firms that don't want to be associated with that, or from a liability perspective, want a human to deal with rather than a machine.
Yeah, there is that kind of issue that's recurringly coming up, what I would call the trust but verify kind of area, where people, and loads of media, for example, are getting caught regularly, where the articles are being generated by AI, for example, and you can see that within the context of the output. But there is to my mind, a trust but verify element to it, that you really need to kind of go through it in detail before you disseminate it out there, because the potential for factual errors is quite high. Particularly in terms of whatever the subject matter it is.
Yeah, it's and I don't see that changing. It's almost built into the very architecture. Don't get me wrong, hallucinations are shrinking and improving all the time, but it's almost built into the very nature of what an LLM is and how it generates outputs. And you raise another point, though, which I think is important around, you mentioned the word automation earlier. At the moment, what I'm seeing in the consulting industry, including in the big firms, is very much a bolt-on approach to AI. So they will build a chatbot based on their documents that can answer questions, so that their senior management aren't being bothered by juniors asking the same question over and over again. Fine. But we're still embedding that in a process of automation, so that it becomes just part of the general architecture and the standard operating procedure of the firm, is the stage where it's going to be making a big difference. At the moment, there's this sort of exclamation around AI as this magical bolt-on thing that can be used, but actually the most powerful examples of it I've seen are where, rather than asking the question, which roles will this replace, it's looking at it at a task level
Mm.
and saying, okay, this is how we typically build PowerPoints. What bits of this can be automated? What bits of this can be done by AI? Where do we need humans in the process to check or possibly create? Because sometimes I see someone's put the Boston Consulting Group article in the chat, and it's worth looking at because it shows that sometimes AI does things much better than humans, including medicine, including diagnoses. Sometimes it does things. It's better to have the human with the AI, and sometimes it's better just to leave it to the human. Increasingly over time, of course, what we'll get is that the AI acting by itself will probably, in most instances, produce better outcomes than the human. And then we've got a whole load of new questions that we need to answer around not just liability and choice of the client, but also what we do as humans when AI can be a better expert than we are.
No, we'd seen, I mean, you are correct, Joe, and I think we'd seen that beginning of that, I suppose the foothills of the Himalayas is the analogy I would use in terms of medicine and diagnostics. And we saw that with the iPhone over the last couple of years in terms of that kind of health and medicine and technology coming together. And that's a wonderful example of good use of time and labor and so on. One of the questions we get asked kind of directly and at the Institute here is more of a practical one. And I'd be interested to get your own view in terms of data visualization. So in management consultancy, inevitably, is about data visualization in terms of generating reports and stuff like that. And we often get asked, what sort of, generating Excel spreadsheets over the PowerPoints is a case in point. I think someone mentioned it there earlier. So in that particular application, is there anything you're seeing out there that's really good in terms of harvesting data from Excel and moving it over to PowerPoint or whatever spreadsheet or kind of visual data you're using?
Oh yes, yeah, they are. There's loads. I mean, you can actually now do it within Excel if you're or Google Sheets. So you don't need a third-party application. You can give natural language commands to Copilot or Gemini in Google Sheets and ask it to create visualizations for you. You've also got a whole load of third-party apps. I'm just pulling up some of my favorites as we speak.
No, we got a question there. Kind of, someone was being very specific about SurveyMonkey and harvesting from SurveyMonkey. But we'll come back to that, folks. I don't have a particular answer. Maybe unless Joe, you have one.
Let me have a look. That's okay. A few questions. Can any JI can take select PowerPoint files as training material? And yeah, okay. I can't see the SurveyMonkey question. What does it say?
Sorry, someone mentioned it privately to me.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
They were a little bit
A bit shy.
GDPR reverse, maybe.
Okay. In fact, there's a few questions come up, so let me address some of them. So Sharon says big firms had chatbots prior to Gen AI. Yes, of course. Yeah, I mean, I remember using chatbots in the 80s. I guess the major difference is that they were pretty awful. I've used some of the big four chatbots in the past, and you're completely right. They did have them, but not particularly good. Amelia rightly puts up this fantastic article by, I'm sure most of us have seen it, looking at it was an experiment done by Boston Consulting Group, and I think it was Harvard or MIT, looking at the impact of GPT 3.5 and the use of it by consultants. And it found that it improved the performance across the board of consultants and also performed the speed of tasks, but it actually had a much bigger impact on weaker consultants than better consultants. So it kind of brought up the poor performers much more than it did improve the big, the good performers in the firm. But it's important to note that was chat 3.5. It wasn't 4, it wasn't 4.5, it wasn't 4 turbo, and it certainly wasn't 5 that's going to come out in the next 3 or 4 months. For those of you that want to see the difference, if you've used an AI LLM in the last few months, it's worth paying the subscription and trying out Claude 3. Claude 3 now on most measures outperforms ChatGPT 4 or 4.5 or 4 turbo, especially for written content. So I've always very much shied away from using any AI in my content at all. My experiments with Claude 3 in the last week or so really have me worried and excited, because it generates, given some of my material to look at, it generates high quality blogs, and I'm sure within 6 months it could write a better book than I'm writing, certainly quicker.
And
And that's
Joe, how would you rate
worrying.
it how would you rate it against Copilot?
I mean, Copilot, I believe, is GPT-4 in a different format. So in effect, Microsoft is taking OpenAI's. This is the source of the court case with Elon Musk.
Yeah.
In effect, it's a wrapper around GPT-4, but
Some
embedded
additional
in the
downloads.
Office suite. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you're kind of backing Claude 3 at the moment as the current kind of Happy Valley spot.
Yeah, so and also in answer to someone's questions about what model I use, there's a website called Hugging Face that has a leaderboard of all the different LLMs. Some of them are open source, some of them are closed, some of them are downloadable, some of them aren't. But you can also search for specific use cases. So if you want one that's doing, transcription versus blog creation versus calculations, you can search for which ones are suited to your use case. And I think that's the way that we're moving now, is sort of much more specific case-based LLMs, rather than these big general ones, which are very, tend to be more expensive and are good at a lot of things, but aren't specifically trained for your output. And I mentioned latency earlier, and latency is the speed of operation is important if you've got this embedded in other software, because you don't want a client thinking, well, this chatbot that they've given me to check up on the speed, what's happening with my project isn't working. I'm just closing it down. I'm gonna go and complain. I'm building a chatbot at the moment that does role plays for my students, but it's audio based. So rather than just typing into it, they can actually have a phone call, and we can potentially integrate it with a mobile system, so that it phones a student up, pretends to be an angry client, and then can give them feedback on what they could improve with their interactions. And in those situations, latency is so important, because you don't want that unrealistic situation where it takes 2 seconds for a system to reply to you.
So, Joe, a subject matter close to your heart, given your academic kind of hat as well, and we get frequently asked, an element of a lot of the SME consulting kind of profession is in terms of CPD or training, for example, where they would offer training solutions, and you are seeing that evolution in terms of video avatars coming through, and I suppose, as you said earlier, in terms of the quality, be it DALI or whatever. Has certainly incrementally leaped forward. What's your own view in terms of that, in terms of where that's going for CPD training and the profession?
So yeah, so I mean, if I guess this applies to training generally, and so you're talking about the role of AI in
Yeah.
training consultancy, in effect. Yeah, okay. So this is interesting. So generally speaking, I encourage smaller consultancies, especially, to avoid tech, to avoid software development, to avoid SaaS.
Okay.
Now, just simply because I've seen it go wrong so many times, I'd say, 1 in every 7 projects, maybe 10 projects that I've seen fails. They're very different business models. They require very different skills, but we can argue that, another time. Now, with
But
AI,
here,
go on.
is there a but coming here?
Yeah, well, but with AI. So with AI, it's muddying the waters, because the great thing about consultancies is they have loads and loads of qualitative data very often, which LLMs love, that and a very rich understanding of very specific domains, and that allows you to providing you've got you've recorded the data,
Yeah.
quite in-depth role plays or like the one I'm building, I need about 50 scripts, and I can get these from my students, of course. If I say to my students, look, we're going to do a role play, I'm going to record it, I'm going to use it anonymously with the LLM, I can get 50 transcripts quite easy about a specific. So it's the amount of data that you can capture to train it. What you'll find is that you could use you could use ChatGPT-4 quite easily to set up a role play situation of an angry client or of a negotiation situation. However, what you'll find is that without your own data in there and a fair amount of it, on the edges, it will take you through a standard case fairly easily. But if there's anything to the side, if there's anything sort of on the bell curve that's quite unusual, someone approaches things differently, it won't perform very well. It kind of throws it out of kilter. So the more transcripts, the more observations, the more data of your own that you can put into it of that type, the much more likely you are to get a high quality response.
So inevitably, the added value is going to be on the margins, because that's where the competitive kind of value that you have against the competition is going to be.
Yeah. Yes, and this is all about depth of about two things: depth of expertise, but also the extent to which you've captured that. I'm quite lucky because I've got access to university students, but also I'm lucky because I've just published hundreds of thousands of words over the years about a specific thing. So I have this data. At the moment, I'm going through and it's transcribing the YouTube videos. It's getting the blogs into a Q&A format. Anyone that runs a podcast, transcripts of podcasts are ideally suited for training LLMs because it's that question and answer format. If you were cynical and you were, I don't know, let's say an expert in leadership training in the automotive sector, you could just scrape the internet for blogs and podcasts of that and probably generate several million words worth of content and have a bot that could do what you wanted, from role plays through to writing blogs on that specific topic. So it's, as you said, Patrick, it's Wild West territory at the moment.
And where do you see, say, the next kind of 36 months going? Where do you see it going, Joe, at the moment? What's your sense of it?
I think the hype's going to die down a bit, obviously. But what's different between generative AI and any other hype curve that's come before is, number one, it's immediately available. So anyone can get access to, the best, chatbot in the world ever for $20 a month. So that's number one. As if you've got a computer, you can get access to it. Number two is the almost universality of its application. So it's not a single user case; it's thousands and thousands of use cases. And number three is the extent to which it's continuously improving, the speed at which it's improving. So those three things really set it apart, which means that I'm terrible at making predictions. I called Brexit wrong, I called Trump wrong, and I called Boris Johnson wrong. So I'm not in the business of crystal ball, but I think it's going to be quite an upsetting medium term. Already there are whole categories of jobs that have disappeared. Nobody's really noticed. There aren't any transcribers anymore. There's no need for someone to sit in meetings and take notes. So we're slowly going to see more and more tasks ticked off and replaced with AI, just simply for cost and quality reasons. The extent to which there's going to be a backlash to that, I don't know. And also we're going to see a much more solid embedding of AI into standard processes rather than seen as a bolt-on.
So we're seeing the Digital Act coming through Europe at the moment in terms of ethics in that particular area, which is obviously going to be a huge an interesting evolution. What's your view in terms of the whole ethical application of AI in terms of, I suppose, the space we're in?
I mean, if I'm honest, if I could put AI back in Pandora's box, I would do so. I think it's dangerous on a number of levels. Not necessarily right now, but in 2 years.
We have seen Terminator, Joe, so we know where we're going here.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I mean, you can use AI to hack much more effectively than you can use humans to hack now. You can, even if you forget about the job replacement or the task replacement, there's a whole load of threats. I think what we're going to see is almost a tripartite of activity following this act. There's going to be a strong percentage of the population that just ignore it, and it's going to be very hard to catch them. And those aren't necessarily nefarious, actors. They might be people who just want to experiment and don't want to get bogged down, so they just put in various safeguards so that no one can see what they're doing. There's going to be the big firms that, for liability reasons, are going to take on the bureaucracy, the transparency, and the reporting. And then there's going to be a whole load of people in the middle, who are kind of aware of the act, but aren't going to, will adhere to it if they know about it and can do it. But in effect, the genie, because these are open source, because so many of these are open source, because they are downloadable, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. So I think it's going to be a really tough one to control.
I mean, you would have concerns, Joe, for the future of literature as a case in point, and books. Given the speed of I suppose that particular area and what we're seeing now, and I even see in some of the health warnings that this is AI generated on some of the books that are coming out. I mean, I did an example there a couple of weeks back. I typed in, if you were to navigate your way out of the Brexit morass, give me a couple of chapters. Now it did nearly break Chat GPT. There was smoke coming out of the back of the
Okay.
I think I really challenged it there, but I mean, it came up with, I was humorously doing it, but it came up with a very plausible kind of narrative in terms of a couple of chapters. It was readable. I would be hard pressed to say that it wasn't kind of good quality.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I'm concerned, just from an academic perspective. I think ChatGPT is always going to be challenged with the cutting edge, innovative stuff. And I don't mean that it can't be creative, because it can be creative. I mean that if there is a new challenge, like a new, say, COVID, or a new piece of technology that impacts something, it's very badly suited to think about that, because it's based, it's generative AI is based on vast amounts of old documents and data. However, for everything else, I worry as an academic, because it can generate as good of insights as academics, in most cases, faster. And if in some areas that it can't, it will do so. The difference is where there's going to be sort of experimentation. So the pure research bit,
Yeah.
in terms of me going out and actually speaking to people, as I'm doing with this AI book, what are you doing? How are you doing it? Does it really work? Can you give me some evidence for that? AI is probably not going to be able to do that. But we may be in a situation where government funding priorities for research are partly determined by AI, in which case I become the hands, eyes, and mouth of an AI system that's telling me what to research.
And we do see people actually putting their hand up and saying that, for example, that they use it as an aid, as a prompt, if they're having writer's block or whatever, that they use it, which I have to say is quite good. I see Jan there has asked the question: how would finance directors and C-suite roles be impacted with AI? Well, just from my own kind of observation there, I would say that it will be an assistance in the first instance, because it's about data and data harvesting and data visualization. So it may be something that kind of can help there. But I think at board level, there is a lot of concern around AI at the moment in terms of the integrity of the information coming through on that trust or verify piece that we said earlier. So I suspect it'll be a topic that people need to be abreast of. They need to kind of keep up to date on it, but I don't think it's going to change the actual steel in the eyes process that you need to have around a board table where people make hard decisions. Certainly for some of the softer stuff, yeah, it's fine in terms of data crunching and so on. But ultimately, at that level, at that C-suite, there is an emotive element of it as well, that there is that kind of difficult decisions that have to be made. I suspect at the moment we're a long way from AI replacing boards. But having said that, I say that's not inevitable in the future, that the logic that it generates wouldn't be sufficiently helpful to making decisions.
Yeah, there's I mean, a lot of the, so I obviously, with consultancies that I advise, typically very often they'll go and go and sell. What I'm seeing over the last year is a lot more private equity firms
Yeah.
using AI for due diligence. Now, there, I get annoyed with private equity full stop, because they generally don't develop a really deep understanding of the firms that they invest in. And I think AI is possibly only going to make that worse. I'd like to think it would make it better, but I think it's a cost-cutting exercise for private equity at the moment. And there's lots of examples like that. Scanning balance sheets, scanning profit and loss accounts, and all the rest of it, um, and also getting third-party data about market trends, and really assessing the validity of what the board of any specific firm, their decisions that they're making.
Hmm. And at board level, one of the key themes that we see at the moment is diversity. Someone was mentioning it there earlier on the chats, but that diversity is an emotional and an intellectual, big word there, like marmalade, struggling with that. An intellectual kind of, I suppose, added value as well. And by the nature of AI at the moment, it's getting there, but it's not there yet. That human diversity actually is where the richness of boards really kind of find their expression. It's having those kind of really diverse and kind of out of the box thinking, that that old pale, male and stale epoch that has come to an end now at boards. We're seeing a huge step change in terms of how boards go about their business and the intellectual diversity that boards bring. AI, not there yet, but it may get there in due course.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? It's I mean, we all know about the biases that are inherent in any form of digital technology, and it's been shown to be the case in AI. And even when guardrails are put on, actually it tends to, the guardrails are a fairly clumsy approach to governance of AI, and it tends to completely reverse the discrimination. So you find, that white older men get discriminated against with some of the generations that come out. You can get AI to take on personas, whether you want to or not. Whether there's lots of inherent bias potentially in getting it to do that. But there's something different that AI brings. So you may be right. There may be an argument that different perspectives can be linked to different diversity groups. I don't know the evidence behind that, but AI might be part of that mix. AI might bring a different perspective that increasingly, boards might be asked, well, where's the robot on the board?
Yeah, no, that's a fair point, actually. And if you're bringing it to its logical conclusion. And speaking of conclusions, Joe, I mean, we are a herd of management consultants here with you, listening eagerly to the knowledge you so kindly shared. It would be remiss of me not to ask you, I suppose, in terms of just getting into the weeds. And you mentioned a few of them earlier, but I mean, what are you seeing that's really hot in terms of kind of particular applications at the moment, over and above the regular ones like ChatGPT? Are you seeing really any really interesting ones from a management consultancy point of view?
Yeah, so there's quite a bit. Okay, so I guess the most common one is building your own chatbot, which is based on your firm's documents and all the rest of it.
Okay, yeah.
There's a couple of there's a website called Hansai, and there's quite a few like this that integrate with your Google Drive, your Google Mail, your OneDrive, Slack for those of you that use it, and in effect uses that to train itself. So it's kind of taking off the burden of you having to constantly feed documents in. Any new documents that you put in, get indexed, gets referenced, and contribute to the training. Now, obviously, you need to put governance around that so that, you know, perhaps your employees don't necessarily see your plans for selling the company in 2 years' time. But that's the most common thing that I'm seeing. I'm also seeing a lot of automation, a lot of a lot of stuff around contracts, saving money with lawyers. There's a lot of specialist AI contract writers and contract checkers. And that's also quite useful for checking your existing contracts, because very often when firms go to sell, and I'm sure most of you will know this, but it's found in the due diligence that the contracts aren't up to scratch, and so they all need to be redone. You're adding time into the selling process, and therefore it's less likely that you're going to get a successful sale. So there's things around that. There's a lot around data storage and data handling, data cleaning. But as I say, at the moment, a lot of this is bolt on, and you know, we're going to see over the next 6 months to a year a lot more of this being embedded in existing processes. So, you know, whether it's creating PowerPoint documents or Excel spreadsheets, it's going to there's going to be a lot more automation around the AI engine, and that's going to open up a whole load of more opportunities for the consulting industry.
Okay. Well, Joe, look, that's been really, really rich, really powerful. Someone asked that Ansai. Can you spell that? Ansai?
Hansai.
Inevitably, they would ask you that
There
trick
we go.
question.
It's in the chat. In the chat.
Ansai. As in the
Also,
Japanese.
just very just very quickly, Product Hunt has quite a good section on AI. So if you're looking for an AI solution for a specific, there's thousands of bits of software out there. Product Hunt website is quite good at finding well-rated software solutions generally, but it's got a section for AI as well.
Okay, super. We put that up into the thing as well. All right. Does anyone have any final questions for Joe before we get you back to the cold face? Okay. Well, hindsight is, so hindsight is okay. So in terms of the outlook for consultants, would you say that there will always be requirements for humans with expertise to contextualize the insights that AI offers? Surely client organizations without strategic management knowledge wouldn't be able to derive optimum value from AI insights and therefore would still need a consultant. Good man, Mike. That's a good jawbreaker of a question there.
Yeah. I mean, I keep looking for things that AI won't be able to do in 5 years. And if you imagine, for example, that you've got three McKinsey, bad example, I'm not a big fan, but let's say, for example, 3 McKinsey digital twins of their top partners in automotive, trained on all the McKinsey documents and everything those partners have said, plus with access to big data sets. And then that's been leased out as SaaS to a specific company. So that company, the AI then has access to all the company documents and can do a live Q&A with the board. All of this is kind of possible now. It wouldn't be perfect, but in 5 years' time, it can contextualize that. I can't see any reason why it couldn't contextualize that. The gap might be where there are new challenges emerging in the market, that something like COVID, something like lockdown, something like an unexpected event. That's what it would struggle with, I think, more.
And I note that Mark has kindly put up a chart there on today, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. Any comments on that, Joe?
Yeah, well, like that. Well, yes, what we call strategy is actually planning. Yeah, okay, yeah. So if you put AI into that equation, I think it kind of works, but you're shrinking the timelines down to months rather than years.
He got that himself, yeah. Okay. And Sora, sorry, PJ, I'm not sure if Sora is the correct term. Are you familiar? I'm not familiar with Sora.
Yeah,
S-O-R-A.
so sort of the big video generator that people are making a big fuss about at the moment. My friend has access to it in the States now. It's paid and it's quite expensive. I don't know when it's going to be. What tends to happen, it tends to be California, then the States, then the UK for some reason, and then Europe, and then everywhere else. So I'd expect it to be an expensive offering in the next 6 months.
Okay. Well, Joe, look, we're coming to the conclusion. Garmila Mahagat, as we say in Irish. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful as always, and we look forward to having you back in due course. And guys, I would say, you know, support Joe. His book is coming out, well worth the read. It's on Amazon. We'll send you the links thereafter. Joe, it's as I say, it's a journey we're on. And as I said at the outset, you could almost call it a digital Camino that we're progressing on. We're in
Oh,
the
I
foot.
like that. Very good, Patrick.
That's it. The foothills of the Himalayas, and we don't know if the Yetis are going to bite us on the way. So, look, great session. Thanks a lot.
Thank
And
you.
we have the recording. And Joe, I'll talk to you offline about maybe having a Ballygowan in Galicia in April, and we'll chat to you then. All right,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thank you. Our next session is coming up with Joe's colleague, actually, Professor Haslan, Simon Haslan. Again, very lucky to have him. That's on the 10th of April. We'll be sending out details. The recording will be available for members. And if you have any queries, please feel free to get on to us. We'll just get you out with 1 minute to spare. Thanks so much. Slán go fóill. Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Thank you, Patrick.
Bye, Joe.